I am positioned on the courthouse grounds, observing as unfamiliar people place bids on my home. 15,000, going once. The auctioneer's call reverberates against the concrete. What chain of events led me to this point? It began when my HOA president, Karen Whitmore, decreed that the very windows she had personally sanctioned were now abruptly non-compliant. She believed she could ruin my life over home renovations for which I possessed written authorization. However, Karen made a single, crucial error. She was unaware that I keep records of everything. Each falsehood, each intimidation, and every single violation notice from those dreadful community center gatherings. Jump ahead 5 years, and I am clutching a check for $75,000. Can you guess whose name is signed on it? Correct, Karen Whitmore herself. She possessed no inkling of the cascade she had initiated when she chose to challenge the wrong electrician. So, what course of action would you take if your HOA attempted to seize your home because of approved upgrades? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Let's observe how widely this narrative travels. My name is Marcus Fricks. I am a 52-year-old union electrician, and I once believed I grasped the concept of power. It seems I understood nothing of the authority that accompanies a clipboard and a poor disposition. Following my divorce, a secure place for my daughter Emma's weekend stays was essential. At 16 years old, she was already navigating sufficient turmoil. I sought stability. Willowbrook Estates appeared ideal. Serene streets, children riding bicycles, and the aroma of barbecue. Wafting from backyards on summer nights, the residence required renovation, but that is my area of expertise. The original 1973 windows were a financial drain each winter, with their single-pane aluminum frames that practically welcomed the frigid air indoors. I spent months researching replacements. Double-pane vinyl, energy-efficient, and in a historically suitable style. This is where I committed my initial blunder. I put my faith in the process. I presented my architectural request as a conscientious homeowner would, complete with photos, technical specifications, contractor credentials, the full dossier. The HOA was allotted 30 days for a response. On the 28th day, my approval letter arrived. Request approved for installation. It was as clear as could be. Endorsed by the architectural committee, the installation was professional, with city permits and an inspector's approval. Everything was done according to regulations. Those windows were a fantastic improvement and reduced my heating expenses by half. For precisely 2 weeks, I felt as though I had hit the homeowner jackpot. Then Karen Whitmore resolved to dismantle my life. Karen served as our HOA president, governing Willowbrook as her private fiefdom, a real estate agent by profession. She was a control enthusiast by disposition. Imagine an individual who would use a homeowners association as a weapon simply because she derived pleasure from seeing others squirm. She had a blonde bob styled like a helmet, a leather portfolio held like a shield, and a smile that could freeze hell over. I was grilling burgers for Emma when my phone lit up with notifications. Mr. Fricks, your unauthorized modifications are unacceptable. Karen, I have it in writing that they were approved. Approval was conditional, subject to a final board review. I examined my letter. There were no conditions mentioned anywhere. Where is that stated? Click. She hung up. That Tuesday evening, I entered the community center armed with my approval letter and a sense of righteous certainty. This was a poor decision. The room smelled of industrial-strength coffee and shattered aspirations. Karen was seated behind a folding table, presiding as if over a war crimes tribunal. Your window installation is in violation of community standards, she declared, pushing a violation notice in my direction like it was a death sentence. I presented my approval. You already consented. Approval does not assure compliance. Her pen made a scratching sound across another form, the noise of bureaucratic retribution. A $500 fine with 30 days to pay, $500 for adhering to their own rules. I scanned the room at my neighbors. Every one of them looked away. The silence in that space was overwhelming. It was then that I realized. Karen wasn't upholding rules. She was setting an example. The violation notice contained a threat veiled in legalese. Fines would double each month until compliance was achieved. That night, I sifted through my HOA documents, charting the financial catastrophe Karen had just set in motion. Month 1. $500. Month 2. $1,000. Month 3. $2,000. My post-divorce finances could not withstand this kind of arithmetic. Attorneys required a $5,000 retainer just to review the case. I was facing financial ruin no matter which path I chose. Either pay Karen's ever-increasing demands or fund a legal battle against her. But there's something Karen didn't comprehend about electricians. Troubleshooting is our profession. When a circuit fails, we trace every single wire to locate the issue, and I was on the verge of finding out that Karen Whitmore had been short-circuiting this entire community. The most shocking discovery was this. While exploring my alternatives, I drove through Willowbrook and counted identical window installations. There were 47 homes with the exact vinyl windows I had installed. These were 47 neighbors who had never been issued a violation notice. Karen was not enforcing community standards. She was operating a protection scheme, and I was her latest mark. The question remained, what distinguished me from those other 47 homeowners? I was about to learn the answer, and it would alter the entire situation. Karen's retaliation was swift and severe. 2 weeks after I had publicly challenged her at the community meeting, a certified letter was waiting in my mailbox like a coiled viper. It was a property lien notice for $2,000. My hands genuinely trembled as I read the itemized charges. The initial $500 fine had somehow ballooned into a financial behemoth, inflated by late fees, administrative charges, and enforcement costs. Karen had turned bureaucracy itself into a weapon. The most painful part, however, was hidden in the third paragraph. Failure to satisfy lien may result in foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure over windows she had personally approved. That evening, I phoned Janet Bennett, my 73-year-old neighbor whose garden was the most beautiful in all of Willowbrook. Her voice quivered as she answered, and I knew instantly that Karen had reached her as well. "Oh, Marcus, I had hoped you would call. Karen visited yesterday. She was asking questions about your circumstances. Whether you appeared financially sound, if Emma visited often, and if you were maintaining your property." Janet paused, her silence heavy. "She is constructing a case against you." Then came the disclosure that changed the course of everything. She did the same to me last year over my garden gnomes, claiming they violated aesthetic standards. "I'm 73, Marcus. I just moved the gnomes instead of fighting." After we hung up, I dedicated the entire night to researching Ohio property law on my laptop, the screen's blue light searing my exhausted eyes. That's when I found something that made me sit bolt upright. Back in trade school, our instructor always preached, "Know the code before you run the wire." It turned out HOA liens operate on the same principle. One must understand the legal prerequisites before filing the paperwork. The Ohio statute was unambiguous. HOA liens demand proper legal notification, including a 30-day period to cure the issue. Karen had bypassed this step and gone directly to filing the lien. Her whole threat was built on a flimsy foundation, and she was gambling that I wouldn't recognize the difference. The following morning, I drove to the county recorder's office basement, a place that smelled of decaying paper and forgotten ambitions. Yet, concealed within those records, I discovered Karen's critical mistake. Her lien filing was deficient, missing 3 legally required documents. She had taken shortcuts, assuming a blue-collar electrician wouldn't grasp property law. A grave miscalculation. I made copies of everything, filed a formal challenge, and left with the invigorating feeling of my first legal win. A sensation like a powerful current surging through me. But Karen was far from giving up. She convened an emergency board meeting to clarify the window policies. Upon my arrival at the community center, the atmosphere felt different, charged with Karen's frantic energy and the perpetual scent of scorched coffee. "The board has determined that previous approvals were issued in error," she declared, reading from a prepared statement. "All non-conforming windows must be replaced within 60 days. I rose to my feet, the sound of my work boots echoing on the linoleum. "You can't retroactively void approvals, Karen. That constitutes a breach of contract." "Mr. Hicks, you are out of order." "No, you are out of line," I countered, holding up my research like a winning hand. "Your lien is legally invalid. You failed to provide proper notice as required by state law." Karen's complexion shifted from white to red, then to a shade nearing purple. "This meeting is adjourned," but the harm was done. I had mortified her in front of the board and Karen. Whitmore was someone who collected resentments as others collect stamps. The blowback was immediate. A collection agency named Debt Recovery Solutions, an operation from Columbus that specialized in harassing homeowners, began to call, "Mr. Hicks, you have an outstanding balance of $2,400. We have the authority to garnish your wages and seize your bank accounts. That lien is invalid. I've filed a legal challenge. Our client's records indicate otherwise." Sleep became a commodity I could no longer afford. Emma picked up on it during a weekend visit, her perceptive, 16-year-old eyes missing nothing. "Dad, you look worn out. What's going on?" How could I explain that the neighborhood tyrant was trying to take our home? I simply pulled her into an embrace. "Just some tedious adult matters, sweetheart." That was when my obsession with documentation began. I transformed the spare bedroom into a war room. A timeline adorned one wall, along with copies of every single document and photographs of windows from all over the neighborhood. If Karen intended to play a game, I would master its rules better than she ever did. The major insight came from mapping her enforcement activities. There were 47 houses with identical windows, but the violations showed a troubling trend. Every homeowner who was targeted was either a renter, a member of a minority group, or working class like myself. Karen's friends from the country club received polite reminders for the very same infractions. I was looking at systemic discrimination masquerading as community standards. Then Karen unleashed her ultimate weapon. A high-priced HOA attorney from Columbus. His initial letter arrived on stationery that likely cost more than my monthly power bill. It was a demand for immediate compliance and payment of all outstanding fines, which now amounted to $3,600. Karen was escalating her attack, banking on financial duress to crush me. She had no idea she was inadvertently training an electrician to trace the largest short circuit in the neighborhood's history. Karen's costly Columbus lawyer did not favor subtle intimidation. His letter arrived on cream-colored stationery that likely had a higher per-sheet cost than my hourly wage. It was a notice of intent to foreclose, stating, "Your client has 30 days to satisfy all outstanding obligations or face a sheriff's sale." A sheriff's sale. Those words struck me with the force of touching a live wire barehanded. That weekend, armed with my measuring tape and camera, I embarked on the most critical electrical job of my career. However, instead of tracing circuits, I was documenting discrimination. House by house, window by window, I photographed every single vinyl replacement in Willowbrook Estates. The scent of autumn leaves crunched beneath my boots as I traversed streets I once thought I knew. What I unearthed turned my stomach. There were 47 houses with windows identical to mine. Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street, the wife of the bank president, had the exact same brand and style, installed in the same month as mine. Not only did she face no violations, but the HOA meeting minutes actually commended her for her community-minded improvements. 3 blocks over, Carlos Martinez was being relentlessly fined for identical windows. His transgression? Being a mechanic who rented his home instead of owning it. Karen's violation notice described his windows as inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards. Same windows, unequal treatment, the pattern was undeniable. Back at my house, the spare bedroom had morphed into something between a detective's evidence room and an electrician's troubleshooting hub. Photographs blanketed every wall, connected by colored strings to a map of the neighborhood. Blue pins marked Karen's friends who received mere warnings. Red pins indicated people like me who were issued fines. The story told by the red pins made my hands tremble. On Tuesday evening, Janet Bennett called, her voice a whisper. "Marcus, I found something I think you should see. Can you come over discreetly?" Janet's kitchen smelled of jasmine tea and a lifetime of quietude. With trembling fingers, she passed me a manila folder, her eyes nervously glancing towards the windows as if expecting Karen to be watching. "I kept everything from my garden gnome dispute last year. I thought that perhaps someday," her voice faded, "someone with more courage than me might have a use for this." That folder contained the equivalent of dynamite, camouflaged as paperwork. It held email exchanges between Karen and other board members that would make a civil rights attorney's pulse race. One email made me hold my breath. "We need to be strategic about enforcement, target renters and blue-collar types first. They're less likely to have legal resources to fight back." Legal resources. Karen had profiled me from the very start, betting that a divorced electrician couldn't afford a proper legal defense. "Janet, why didn't you challenge this? This is irrefutable evidence of discrimination." Her weathered hands gently closed the folder. "Because I am a 73-year-old Chinese widow, and Karen Whitmore governs this place like her personal domain? Who would have believed me?" That night, I researched fair housing law until my eyes burned from the screen's glare. It turned out that selective HOA enforcement based on race or economic status is a violation of federal law. Not just HOA bylaws, but actual crimes with significant penalties. Karen wasn't merely being a neighborhood despot. She was operating an illegal discrimination enterprise. The following morning, with hands that would not stop shaking, I contacted Ohio Legal Aid. The intake specialist's tone became animated when I detailed my collection of evidence. "Sir, if you can document systemic patterns, this could become a federal fair housing case. How much documentation do you possess?" 3 full boxes with photographs and timelines dating back 5 years. "Hold on. Do not speak to anyone else. We are assigning an attorney to your case immediately." Her name was Sarah Martinez. We met 2 days later in a conference room that smelled of fresh coffee and optimism. She laid out my photos on the table like a royal flush, her eyes brightening with every piece of evidence. "Marcus, this is a classic case of housing discrimination. Selective enforcement, economic profiling, and racial targeting. Karen has violated at least 6 federal laws." Sarah leaned in, tapping the timeline I had constructed. She made one critical error by choosing to bully an electrician. "What do you mean?" "Electricians are trained to trace problems back to their origin. Most people would only see individual infractions. You documented the entire corrupt system." But Karen was not ready to concede. Her lawyer filed for an expedited foreclosure, asserting that I posed an imminent community risk. The emergency hearing was set for Friday, just 4 days away. On Thursday night, Emma found me engulfed by legal briefs and cold coffee, readying myself for the battle of our lives. "Dad, you look petrified. Is someone actually trying to take our house?" I pulled her into a hug, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Do you remember when that kid Tyler kept taking your lunch money until you finally reported him to the principal?" "Yeah, and he was suspended." "Well, sometimes bullies don't quit until someone makes them. Karen has been taking people's lunch money for years with these fraudulent violations. Tomorrow, I'm going to the principal." Emma squeezed my hand. Good, Tyler needed that lesson too. Friday morning dawned cold and overcast as I walked into the courthouse carrying 3 boxes of evidence. I saw Karen across the hall, dressed in an expensive suit with a confident smirk. She believed she was up against a frightened electrician. She was completely unaware that she was about to confront a federal discrimination case. The courtroom felt frigid, yet sweat trickled down my back as Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the case files. Karen sat perfectly erect next to her attorney, exuding the confidence of someone who had never lost a legal battle to a working-class individual. She was about to discover that confidence is not synonymous with competence. "Your Honor," Karen's lawyer started, "Mr. Cricks has deliberately violated community covenants for 18 months. The HOA has demonstrated remarkable patience, but his continued defiance is a threat to neighborhood stability." Remarkable patience. I nearly burst out laughing. Then it was Sarah Martinez's turn. She rose with the deliberate grace of a gunslinger in a classic Western and delivered the first blow. "Your Honor, we are filing a federal fair housing counterclaim. The evidence reveals a pattern of systematic discrimination that targets minority and working-class residents." Sarah opened my first box of evidence. We possess documented proof of selective enforcement that extends over a 5-year period. Judge Morrison's eyebrows arched upwards. Karen's lawyer turned pale. This hearing was not supposed to be about discrimination. It was meant to be a straightforward HOA foreclosure. But the true bombshell dropped when Sarah presented Janet Bennett's folder of emails. "Your Honor, we have internal HOA communications that explicitly discuss targeting strategies based on residents' economic status and their likelihood of mounting a legal defense." She read Karen's email aloud. "Target renters and blue-collar types first. They're less likely to have legal resources." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the court reporter paused for a moment. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her expression shifting from one of bored routine to one of keen interest. Karen's face contorted through phases of confusion, panic, and then a fury. She leaned over to hiss at her attorney. But the damage was already spreading like an electrical fire through dry timber. "Your Honor," Sarah went on, 47 houses in Willowbrook Estates have identical window installations. There are 0 violations for residents with connections to the HOA president. There is 100% enforcement against minority and working-class homeowners. Judge Morrison declared a 30-minute recess. Karen's lawyer spent that time on his phone, likely contacting his malpractice insurance provider. When court reconvened, the judge's demeanor had shifted entirely. This court is profoundly disturbed by the allegations of discriminatory enforcement. Mr. Hicks, your foreclosure case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a comprehensive investigation into the HOA's practices and am referring this matter to the federal prosecutor's office. Karen's world disintegrated in that moment. Her confident smirk dissolved into a look of panic as she grasped that this was no longer just about my house. Federal prosecutors signified criminal charges, and criminal charges could lead to prison time. Leaving that courthouse felt like the first bright day after a year of continuous storm. But Karen was not done. Desperate individuals resort to desperate measures. The harassment intensified almost instantly. Anonymous complaints about unlicensed electrical work at my home began to pour into the city. Code enforcement visited 3 times in 2 weeks, finding nothing but causing me to lose work hours for mandatory inspections. I couldn't prove it was Karen, but the connection was obvious. Reported my truck for commercial vehicle violations in a residential area. Parking tickets materialized out of thin air, even when I was legally parked. Then the phone call started. Heavy breathing, hang-ups, and mumbled threats from disguised voices. Drop the lawsuit or you'll be sorry. These were classic intimidation tactics that might have been effective on someone who didn't possess 3 boxes of federal evidence. The tipping point arrived when Emma called me from school in tears. Someone had reached out to her guidance counselor, expressing concerns about her home life and potential neglect stemming from her father's legal battles. They had involved my 16-year-old daughter in their conflict. That night, I sat in my evidence room, staring at 5 years of Karen's documented misconduct. Phone records, emails, violation patterns, and financial manipulation. She had ruled Willowbrook Estates like her personal fiefdom, ousting anyone who didn't conform to her vision of a proper resident. But concealed within those records, I discovered something that would change everything. Property tax records revealed that Karen owned 3 rental properties in Willowbrook through an LLC named KW Holdings, houses she had never declared to the HOA board, despite clear conflict of interest rules. These were houses with identical window violations that she had overlooked for her own financial advantage. One of those rental properties had the very same windows for which I was being fined, not similar but identical. Same manufacturer, same style, installed by the same contractor. Karen hadn't just been discriminating against working-class residents. She had been manipulating property values to enrich her real estate investment portfolio. The breadth of her corruption was astounding. Selective enforcement devalued properties, which created purchasing opportunities for her investment LLC. She had been systematically rigging the housing market, using her HOA authority as the instrument. I called Sarah Martinez at home. I found it, the smoking gun that ties it all together. What did you find? Karen owns rental properties in the neighborhood, properties with the exact same windows she has been fining other people for installing. Sarah's silence on the line was profound for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, you have just elevated this from a discrimination case to a federal RICO investigation. Karen has been running a criminal enterprise." Karen Whitmore believed she was battling a lone electrician over a few windows. She had no idea she had just roused a federal task force. 3 weeks after the federal referral, as I sat in my evidence room at midnight, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Often, the most significant breakthroughs occur when you're not actively seeking them, much like discovering a short circuit in the most unexpected location. I had been sifting through 5 years of county property records, cross-referencing HOA board decisions with real estate transactions. The scent of burnt coffee permeated the room as my printer worked, relentlessly, churning out deed transfers and tax assessments. That's when I uncovered the shell company. KW Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware, had acquired 3 properties in Willowbrook Estates over the preceding 4 years. The registered agent was listed as Kevin Whitmore, Karen's husband. The truly startling part, however, was the timing of these acquisitions. Every single property had been purchased within 6 months of receiving significant HOA violations. The Martinez home on Oak Street. Carlos was inundated with window fines, deck violations, and landscaping citations. The resulting stress compelled his family to sell at a price below market value. KW Holdings then swooped in with a cash offer 20% below the asking price. the Thompson rental on Pine Street. An elderly couple was cited for fence height, shed placement, and excessive holiday decorations. After 18 months of increasing fines, they sold to evade foreclosure. Once again, KW Holdings acquired the property at a substantial discount, the Bennett property adjacent to Janet's. Her late husband's tools in the garage were deemed to be in violation of residential use standards. The harassment persisted until Janet's daughter persuaded her to sell and relocate to assisted living, and the buyer? You guessed it. My hands genuinely shook as I followed the financial trail. Karen hadn't merely been discriminating against working-class residents. She had been systematically terrorizing homeowners to generate investment opportunities for her family's real estate empire. But the definitive proof was right there in the property files. 2847 Maple Street, acquired by KW Holdings 18 months ago for $43,000 below market value. The listing photos showed that this house had the exact same vinyl windows for which I was being fined. Not similar windows, but identical ones from the same manufacturer, in the same color, with the same grid pattern, installed by the same contractor. Karen had been earning rent from a property with the very illegal windows she was attempting to foreclose on my home for installing. The violation records laid out the entire narrative. The previous owners, an elderly couple named the Patels, received their first window citation 3 years ago. The fines grew monthly. $500, $1,000, $2,000. Until they were on the brink of foreclosure. To avoid losing everything, they sold to the first cash buyer, KW Holdings. Karen's signature was on every violation notice, every fine increase, and every board decision that plunged the Patels into financial distress. Then I discovered the insurance records that made my blood run cold. KW Holdings had submitted a homeowner's insurance claim for storm damage to those same windows 6 months after the purchase. They had received $8,000 to replace windows that supposedly violated HOA standards. Karen had been operating a protection racket disguised as community standards enforcement. The scale of it was staggering. Over a 4-year period, KW Holdings had acquired properties valued at $400,000 for just 60 cents on the dollar, realizing a profit of $160,000 through systematic HOA harassment. Every targeted homeowner matched the same profile: elderly, minority, working class, or rental properties, people lacking the resources for prolonged legal battles, people who would opt to sell at a loss rather than face foreclosure. I cross-referenced Karen's real estate license with the property sales. She had served as the listing agent for 2 of the distress sales, earning a commission on properties that her own HOA harassment had devalued. A clear case of double-dipping on her corruption. But the most damning piece of evidence was an email I located in the county's electronic filing system. Karen had lodged a complaint about declining property values due to non-conforming improvements. In the same month, her LLC purchased the Martinez house. She had literally used her own discrimination as a pretext for a below-market property acquisition. Federal investigators thrive on patterns, and Karen had handed them a 5-year timeline of a criminal enterprise. Conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, housing discrimination, and racketeering. She had broken enough federal laws to populate a small penitentiary. I called Sarah Martinez at 6 a.m., certain she would want to hear this news immediately. "Sarah, I've hit the mother lode. Karen has been running a real estate scam using her HOA authority. This isn't just about discrimination anymore. What are we talking about? A criminal conspiracy spanning 5 years and involving $500,000 in fraudulent property manipulation." Karen thought she was just collecting rent checks. In reality, she was collecting federal evidence. The morning following my discovery, Sarah Martinez convened an urgent meeting. The conference room at her law office smelled of fresh coffee and imminent justice as she spread my property research across a table that had likely witnessed its share of David versus Goliath conflicts. "Marcus, what you have brought to light is not merely HOA misconduct. It is organized crime." Sarah's eyes shone with the fervor of a prosecutor who had found her ultimate target. Karen has been conducting a systematic racketeering operation, using municipal authority as her tool. Within hours, she had brought together what resembled a legal special forces team. There was Rebecca Bennett, a forensic accountant specializing in financial fraud; David Rodriguez, an expert in federal housing discrimination; and the heavyweight, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who prosecuted public corruption cases for the Southern District of Ohio. The strategy session was like observing a master electrician designing a complex rewiring project. Every connection was mapped, every circuit traced, and every potential point of failure was identified. Here is how we will take down Karen's operation, Sarah explained, gesturing to a timeline that now spanned an entire wall. Federal RICO charges necessitate proving a pattern of criminal activity. We have 5 years of systematic property manipulation that establishes our pattern. Rebecca, the forensic accountant, had been scrutinizing KW Holdings' financial records with the zeal of someone who thrived on spreadsheet investigations. The money trail is beautifully simple in its audacity, she declared. Karen and Kevin used the same bank account for both HOA fees and their rental property acquisitions. Every property purchase directly aligns with HOA enforcement actions, but we required more than just financial data. We needed victims who were willing to testify, which meant finding the people Karen had forced out. Janet Bennett became our invaluable asset. Despite being 73 and fearful of Karen's reprisals, she had meticulously documented every instance of neighborhood harassment. More importantly, she had kept in touch with the families who had fled Willowbrook. The Patels moved to Toledo after Karen ruined them. Janet whispered during one of our kitchen table strategy sessions. Maria Santos returned to Puerto Rico. The Johnson family moved to Kentucky, but they all held on to their documents because they sensed something was amiss. I spent the following week acting as a detective, locating former neighbors across 3 states. Each conversation confirmed the same sequence of events. Systematic harassment culminating in a forced sale to KW Holdings. The Patels were in tears when I explained that their ordeal was not a random stroke of bad luck, but a calculated criminal scheme. We lost everything. Mr. Patel recounted over a poor phone connection. 40 years of building equity all gone. Because we couldn't afford attorneys to contest fabricated violations. David Rodriguez, our housing expert, was constructing the federal discrimination case with methodical rigor. He had analyzed the demographics of every HOA enforcement action over the past 8 years, and the statistics were incriminating. 93% of major violations were aimed at minority or working-class families. There was zero enforcement against country club members or fellow real estate professionals. Karen didn't just discriminate, David clarified, she weaponized. Discrimination for financial gain that elevates this from a civil rights issue to a criminal conspiracy. Meanwhile, Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh was coordinating with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. It turned out that Karen's activities had already set off alarms in multiple federal databases. Wire fraud alerts from suspicious property transfers, mail fraud flags from HOA violation notices, and banking irregularities from cash transactions that exceeded reporting limits. She has been on our radar for 6 months, Walsh conceded. Your case provides the crucial element, proof of criminal intent, and a systematic operation. The organization of evidence took over my entire garage. 3 long tables were covered with chronological timelines, property records, financial transactions, and victim testimonies. The space resembled a crime lab, complete with red string linking related events. Emma assisted me after school. Her teenage meticulousness was perfect for cross-referencing dates and financial figures. Dad, Karen is like a truly malevolent landlord who manufactures her own distressed properties. She noted while highlighting bank transfers. That's precisely what she is, sweetheart. But the most rewarding moment came when we investigated Karen's real estate license history. We discovered that she had faced disciplinary action in 2018 for undisclosed conflicts of interest, selling property to her own family members without proper disclosure. The Real Estate Commission had suspended her license for 6 months. Karen was a repeat offender who had simply become more adept at concealing her schemes. Sarah was drafting a lawsuit that read like a political thriller, encompassing federal RICO charges, mail fraud, wire fraud, housing discrimination, conspiracy, tax evasion, and about a dozen other felonies I couldn't even pronounce. The damage calculations alone reached 6 figures. We are not just seeking compensation for you, Sarah explained. We are dismantling an 8-year criminal enterprise and setting a national precedent for HOA accountability. The strategy was brilliantly straightforward. Present Karen with irrefutable evidence of her criminal activities and offer her one opportunity to settle before federal prosecutors brought charges. The choice would be hers: pay massive damages or face up to 20 years in federal prison. Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh smiled as Sarah detailed our plan. I appreciate cases where the defendant has documented their own crimes. Karen has been building our prosecution case for the last 5 years. 3 months of investigation had laid bare the truth. Karen Whitmore was not just a neighborhood tyrant. She was the head of a criminal organization operating under the guise of an HOA. Karen's desperation erupted like a short circuit, sending sparks flying everywhere. The morning after the federal investigation became public knowledge, I discovered a private investigator parked across the street from my house. He was a disreputable-looking man in a dented Camry, photographing Emma as she boarded the school bus. That was a line I would not allow to be crossed. I strode directly to his car window, my work boots crunching on the gravel with enough force to startle anyone. Care, to explain why you are taking pictures of my 16-year-old daughter. The PI lowered his window, and a cloud of cigarette smoke, thick as a guilty conscience, billowed out. Just performing my job? Buddy? Public street, public photography. Whose job? He smirked, then drove away without a response. But I didn't need one. It was obvious Karen had resorted to hiring private investigators, searching for any dirt she could find, even though none existed. By midday, her harassment campaign was in full force. The PI had approached 3 of my neighbors, inquiring about my suitability as a parent and whether Emma appeared neglected due to my legal troubles. Janet Bennett called me at once. Marcus, a dreadful man was just here asking if you drink excessively, if you have unusual visitors, or if Emma seems well-fed and clothed. Janet's voice trembled with outrage. I told him to leave my property immediately or I would call the police. Karen's tactic was clear. If the facts don't support your case, tarnish your opponent's character. But she had misjudged the transformation that had taken place in Willowbrook. The very neighbors she had intimidated for years had finally found their courage. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street, the bank president's wife, called that evening. Marcus, that investigator tried to get information from me about your character. I informed him that you are the best neighbor we have ever had, and if he returned, my husband would have bank security remove him from the premises. Even more gratifying was the call from Carlos Martinez. Hey man, some PI was asking about you. I told him you helped me fix my electrical panel for free last winter, and that anyone who messes with you is messing with the entire neighborhood. The community that Karen had worked so hard to divide was now rallying against her. But Karen's arsenal of dirty tricks was not yet depleted. Wednesday morning, I received a visit from Child Protective Services. A well-intentioned social worker named Mrs. Henderson stood at my door, clipboard in hand, looking genuinely concerned. Mr. Hicks, we received an anonymous tip regarding possible neglect. Someone alleged that your daughter appears malnourished and that your home environment is unstable due to your ongoing legal issues. I invited her in for coffee and showed her my evidence room, which had become the command center for a federal case. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened as she observed the organized timeline, the professional legal documents, and the systematic approach to combating corruption. Sir, whoever filed this report was either misinformed or malicious. Your home clearly demonstrates the presence of a devoted parent fighting for his family's rights. She closed her notepad. Case dismissed, and just between us, continue the good fight. Karen's assaults were backfiring in a spectacular fashion. Thursday brought financial warfare. Someone, again, unprovable but obvious, reported my electrical business to the state licensing board for operating without proper credentials and for performing unsafe work in residential properties. The inspector who arrived, a man named Pete Kowalski, was a 20-year veteran who had seen every trick in the book. He spent an hour reviewing my license, insurance, work permits, and customer testimonials. Marcus, your records are more pristine than most contractors I inspect. Someone is playing games with you. Pete shook his head. I am officially noting this as a frivolous complaint filed with malicious intent. That will be on the record. By Friday, Karen's desperation had reached a new level of absurdity. She attempted to have my work truck towed from my own driveway, alleging a violation of residential parking ordinances. The towing company called me to verify before proceeding. Sir, there is a woman here demanding we tow your vehicle, but you are legally parked on your own property. She seems quite agitated. Would you like us to contact the police? Yes, please do. 20 minutes later, Officer Janet Rodriguez, no relation to our housing expert, was issuing Karen a citation for filing false reports and harassment. Watching Karen attempt to justify her actions to a uniformed officer while neighbors gathered on their porches was the most entertaining event Willowbrook had seen in years. Ma'am, this is your third complaint this week involving Mr. Hicks. I suggest you seek legal advice on harassment laws before this situation escalates. That evening, Sarah Martinez called with an update that made my entire week. Karen's attorney has been contacting our office daily to discuss a settlement. They are aware that the federal case is solid. What are they offering? They started at $10,000 and now they are up to $50,000, plus her resignation from all HOA positions. Sarah's satisfaction was palpable. Karen is bleeding money on legal fees and private investigators, and her case is weakening by the hour. But the most definitive sign of Karen's panic appeared on Sunday morning. Emma saw her driving slowly past our house at dawn, staring at the federal evidence warning signs that Sarah had placed in our windows. "Dad, she looks frightened." Karen Whitmore had every reason to be frightened. She had spent 8 years terrorizing her neighbors with no consequences. Now, she was learning what it felt like to be the one targeted. Karen's last-ditch effort came on a Tuesday morning that began as any other but concluded with the sound of police sirens. I was enjoying my coffee when Officer Rodriguez knocked on my door, her expression a mix of apology and official duty. "Marcus, I regret having to do this, but Karen Whitmore has filed a petition for a restraining order, alleging that you have been stalking and threatening her. Judge Patterson would like to see you in his chambers at 2:00 p.m. Stalking, the woman who had hired a private investigator to photograph my daughter was now accusing me of stalking her. Officer Rodriguez, I have security cameras that cover my entire property. Would you like to review 8 weeks of footage that proves I have been nowhere near Karen's house? Save it for the judge. But between you and me, her story is full of holes." At the courthouse, Karen was seated next to a new attorney, her fourth since this ordeal began. She had clearly invested in her appearance, as the once confident real estate magnate had been replaced by a trembling victim dressed in conservative attire with minimal makeup. "Your Honor," her lawyer began, "my client has been subjected to months of harassment by Mr. Hicks. He has been photographing her property, following her to work, and making threatening phone calls." Judge Patterson appeared, skeptical. "Do you have any evidence to support these claims?" "Well, Your Honor, my client is in fear for her safety due to his aggressive demeanor and the federal investigation he has instigated." Sarah Martinez rose slowly, her briefcase opening with a sound like a gunshot. "Your Honor, we possess comprehensive evidence that proves these allegations are entirely fabricated. Security footage, phone records, GPS data from Mr. Hicks's work vehicle, and witness statements." She presented the judge with a thumb drive. "Everything is time-stamped and verified. During the times of the alleged stalking incidents, Mr. Hicks was either at work sites 20 miles away or at home with his daughter." Judge Patterson spent 15 minutes examining the evidence while Karen's face went through various shades of panic. Finally, he looked up, his expression that of someone who has seen too many baseless lawsuits. "Ms. Whitmore, filing a false police report is a criminal offense. Your petition is denied, and I am recommending that the prosecutor's office review your complaint for potential perjury charges." Karen's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but the damage was already spreading like an electrical fire through damp insulation. Leaving that courthouse, I felt as though I had narrowly avoided a disaster. But desperate individuals with nothing to lose can become dangerously unpredictable. The situation escalated that very evening. Emma called me at work, her voice tense with restrained fear. "Dad, someone broke into our house. Nothing was taken, but all of your evidence boxes have been ransacked. There are papers everywhere. I exceeded every speed limit on my way home." The evidence room was a scene of chaos, as if a tornado had swept through. Documents were strewn about, photos were torn from the walls, and computer equipment was smashed. But the perpetrator was no professional thief. They had overlooked the backup drives concealed in my bedroom closet and the duplicate files stored at Sarah's office. Officer Rodriguez arrived within minutes of my call, her flashlight beam cutting through the disarray. This was not a random act of vandalism. Someone was searching for specific documents. She photographed the scene. "Do you have any idea who might want to destroy evidence in a federal case?" "Only one person, desperate enough to risk a felony charge for breaking and entering. But Karen had just made her most significant error. In her haste to destroy evidence, she had left behind evidence of her attempt to destroy evidence. Federal prosecutors relish obstruction of justice charges. They are straightforward to prove and come with severe prison sentences. The next morning brought Karen's most pitiful attempt at intimidation yet. A process server delivered documents indicating that KW Holdings was suing me for defamation and business interference. They were demanding $200,000 in damages for false accusations that had harmed their real estate investments. Sarah Martinez laughed when I showed her the lawsuit. Marcus, this is perfect. Karen is admitting under oath that she is the owner of KW Holdings and that our federal investigation is damaging her business. She has just confessed to the criminal conspiracy we have been working to prove. How does that help us? Because federal prosecutors can now use her own lawsuit as evidence of criminal intent. She is literally suing us for exposing her crimes. But the final straw came on Thursday evening. Emma was at the kitchen table studying when a brick shattered our front window. Attached was a note written in block letters. Drop the lawsuit or lose more than windows. This crossed the line from harassment to terrorism. I called 911, then Sarah, and then Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh. Within an hour, FBI agents were processing the crime scene while neighbors gathered to show their support. Mrs. Patterson brought Emma a cup of hot chocolate. Carlos Martinez offered to install security cameras. Janet Bennett stood guard with a rolling pin, like a 73-year-old bodyguard. Mr. Hicks, said FBI agent Sarah Kim as she photographed the brick. We are treating this as witness intimidation in a federal case. That is a separate felony that carries a sentence of up to 20 years. Karen had just escalated her crimes from HOA corruption to federal terrorism. The following morning, Agent Kim called with news that made my entire year. We arrested Karen Whitmore at 6:00 a.m. on federal charges: racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, housing discrimination, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. What kind of sentence is she facing? 40 years in federal prison if she is convicted on all counts. Karen Whitmore had finally encountered an authority figure she could not intimidate. The United States Department of Justice. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7:00 p.m. on a Thursday that felt like a combination of Christmas morning and Judgment Day. News of Karen Whitmore's federal arrest had spread through Willowbrook more quickly than gossip at a community bake sale, and everyone wanted a front row seat for the conclusion. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early to find the parking lot already overflowing. Cars were parked along the street for 3 blocks, and I noticed license plates from adjacent counties. This was no longer just a Willowbrook affair. It had become a regional spectacle. The community center was alive with an energy I had never experienced there before. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with a palpable sense of anticipation as neighbors who had hardly exchanged a word in years gathered in small groups, swapping Karen horror stories, like veterans recounting their experiences in battle. Marcus. Janet Bennett beckoned me to the front row, where she had reserved seats as if we were at a premiere. Channel 6 is here, along with that reporter from the Columbus Dispatch. Even the county commissioner showed up. Sarah Martinez made her entrance, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone on the verge of dispensing professional justice. She took her place at the presenter's table as photographers jockeyed for the best angles. At precisely 7:00 p.m., the remaining HOA board members entered, looking as though they would rather be anywhere else on earth. The board's secretary, Helen Morrison, no relation to Judge Patterson, called the meeting to order, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered tonight to discuss recent events concerning former HOA President Karen Whitmore. The room fell silent, the only sound being the clicking of camera shutters, like a chorus of mechanical crickets. Due to criminal charges filed by federal prosecutors, Karen Whitmore has resigned from all HOA positions, effective immediately. Helen's prepared statement shook in her hands. The board wishes to extend its apologies to any residents who may have been subjected to inappropriate enforcement actions. Inappropriate enforcement actions? Even at this point, they couldn't bring themselves to use the word discrimination. Sarah Martinez rose to her feet, the sound of her heels on the linoleum like a ticking clock. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here tonight representing not only Marcus Hicks, but every family that Karen Whitmore has targeted over the past 8 years. She opened her briefcase with a deliberate flourish, producing a settlement check that seemed to radiate under the fluorescent lighting. Karen Whitmore's criminal enterprise has been brought down by federal authorities. Tonight, "We are here to announce the terms of her civil settlement." The crowd leaned forward as one, the silence so profound that you could hear the building's heating system engage. $75,000 in damages to Marcus Hicks for harassment, discrimination, and the attempted theft of his property through fraudulent HOA enforcement. A wave of applause erupted, as if a dam had broken. Emma, seated next to Janet, clapped with such enthusiasm that her hands must have stung. Even the news cameras captured neighbors embracing and cheering as if their team had just won the championship. But Sarah had more to say. Additionally, Karen Whitmore is permanently prohibited from holding any HOA leadership position in the state of Ohio. KW Holdings LLC has been dissolved, and all illegally acquired properties will be returned to fair market value through court-supervised sales. More applause followed, but Sarah raised a hand to restore quiet. Most importantly, this case has set a legal precedent for HOA accountability. No board member in Ohio can ever again exploit community authority for personal financial enrichment without the risk of federal prosecution. It was then that I stood up, my work boots making a resonant sound on the floor as I approached the microphone. The room fell silent once more, but this time the silence felt different. It was one of respect and support. 8 months ago, I believed I was in a dispute with one woman over a few windows. Tonight, I understand that we were fighting for something far greater. I looked around the crowded room, at faces that had been transformed from fearful to empowered. We have demonstrated that ordinary individuals can overcome corruption when they document everything, foster community support, and steadfastly refuse to yield. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 3 minutes. Even the county commissioner was clapping, likely considering how this precedent would safeguard his own constituents. Afterward, the Channel 6 reporter approached me, her cameraman filming the check presentation. "Mr. Hicks, what is your message to other homeowners who are dealing with HOA abuse? Document everything, form alliances, and always remember that bullies rely on your isolation and fear. When communities come together, corruption cannot stand." The celebration spilled out into the parking lot. Neighbors were already planning the first annual Freedom from Harassment Day festival. Carlos Martinez announced his candidacy for HOA president, running on a platform of transparent governance. Mrs. Patterson offered to host a legal rights workshop in her backyard. But the most poignant moment came when Emma hugged me by my truck, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Dad, I am so proud of you. You didn't just fight for our house. You fought for everyone." Looking around at neighbors who were now laughing instead of hiding, planning instead of fearing, I knew Emma was right. This was never about windows or violations or even $75,000. This was about proving that in America, justice is not reserved for those who can afford high-priced lawyers. Sometimes, justice is for electricians with measuring tapes, elderly neighbors with manila folders, and teenagers who believe their fathers can change the world. Karen Whitmore had spent 8 years teaching our neighborhood to be afraid. We had just taught her that fear is a two-way street. 6 months have passed, and I am standing in my backyard, watching Emma rehearse her college application presentation. The very windows that initiated this entire ordeal are gleaming in the afternoon sun. The settlement funds have transformed more than just my financial situation. They have revitalized an entire community. The Willowbrook Estates Scholarship Fund, created with $25,000 from the settlement, presented its inaugural grants last month. Emma was awarded $500 for her essay on confronting injustice, which she will apply toward her pre-law studies at Ohio State University. It seems that witnessing your father combat corruption can have a significant impact on a teenager's career aspirations. "Dad, listen to this part," Emma calls out, reading from her laptop. "My father taught me that documentation is more powerful than intimidation. Community triumphs over corruption, and that ordinary people can effect extraordinary change when they refuse to be silent." A surge of pride fills my chest. Like a strong current flowing through clean wires, the playground renovations, funded by $15,000 from the settlement, were unveiled last week with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that attracted 300 residents. Children who had spent years navigating Karen's threats of violations now swing without a care, while their parents organize movie nights and block parties, free from the fear of retaliation. Carlos Martinez secured the HOA presidency in a landslide victory, campaigning on a platform of transparent governance and equitable enforcement. His first official act was to institute monthly financial reporting and mandate conflict of interest disclosures for board members. His second was to commission a bronze plaque for the community center, honoring those who stand up against corruption. Janet Bennett now conducts garden tours, proudly featuring the gnomes that Karen once outlawed. Marcus taught us that confronting bullies is not just about oneself. She explains to visitors, it is about safeguarding the next person who might become a target. The Legal Defense Fund, established with $10,000 from my settlement, has already assisted 3 families in neighboring counties in their battles against HOA abuse. Sarah Martinez often quips that my case has spawned a cottage industry in HOA accountability law. Attorneys throughout Ohio now cite the Hicks precedent when challenging discriminatory enforcement. Karen's story now serves as a cautionary tale, authored by federal prosecutors. She accepted a plea bargain to evade a trial, resulting in a 3-year sentence in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, KW Holdings was dissolved, and all unlawfully acquired properties were sold at court-supervised auctions. The Patel family used their restitution funds to repurchase their original home, which had remained vacant since Karen's arrest. Mr. Patel called me last week, his voice heavy with emotion. Marcus, we never imagined we would see justice. Thank you for fighting when we were unable to. Ohio House Bill 247, the HOA Transparency Act, was passed by the legislature in March with unanimous bipartisan support. The law mandates conflict disclosure, restricts foreclosure powers, and establishes tenant rights for rentals within HOA communities. I provided testimony at the bill signing ceremony, seated next to Governor Richardson as he enacted legislation that will protect thousands of families from future Karen Whitmores. My electrical business has seen a 3-fold increase in demand, partly because homeowners across central Ohio want to hire the individual who brought down a corrupt HOA, but primarily because word gets around when you are known for helping neighbors solve problems rather than creating them. The annual Willowbrook Freedom Festival is scheduled for next month, complete with live music, food trucks, and booths where residents can share resources for HOA reform. Emma is organizing a voter registration drive, having learned that civic participation is always more effective than passive acceptance. My evidence room has become a local point of interest. Neighbors bring their children to view the timeline and documents that brought an 8-year reign of terror to an end. This is what occurs when good people document bad behavior. I tell them, but the most gratifying victory is the most straightforward one. Last weekend, a young couple with 2 small children purchased the house where the Martinez family once lived in fear. They knocked on my door to ask about the neighborhood, and I was able to tell them with complete honesty. This is a community where people look out for one another. That is what we have constructed from the remnants of Karen's corruption. A true community. The website HOA Abuse Survivors now attracts 50,000 visitors each month, who download template documents and legal resources. My story has sparked similar battles across the nation, demonstrating that one person's courage can be amplified exponentially when others follow their lead. If you have endured HOA harassment, please share your story in the comments below. Share this video with anyone who is confronting neighborhood bullies. Your participation helps other victims find hope and resources. Click subscribe for more tales of David versus Goliath victories, because sometimes the underdog wins when armed with patience, documentation, and an entire community that refuses to remain silent. Remember, bullies depend on your isolation. Communities foster accountability, and sometimes the best form of revenge is simply to refuse to be afraid. Justice is even more satisfying when it is shared with neighbors who have become like family. Thank you for watching End for HOA. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at the absurdity of some HOAs, please hit the like button and leave your thoughts below. We feature HOA Karen chaos and neighborhood conflicts every week, so be sure to subscribe to see the next incredible story.